Join me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast to hear fascinating stories every week from the inspiring people behind the science. Join me in this episode of Lab Matters to find out why licking rocks came up in my conversation with the father of the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony, Marc Abrahams. Today we're very lucky to have Marc Abrahams. Marc is the editor of the publication which is called Annals of Improbable Research, which has a website, www.improbable.com. Marc also used to write for The Guardian, and more recently he's known as Master of Ceremonies and perhaps even as the father of the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony. Hello, Marc. Thanks so much for joining. Really,
Hi, Harriet.
First things first. And I normally go back a bit, and I'll ask you to tell us about your upbringing and everything that came before your professional career. But I can't resist going straight in with you on this one. Can you talk us through the Ig Nobel Prizes and what they are and how they came about?
Sure. They are prizes, first of all, and for things that are real. I'm mentioning that first for a reason. These are 10 prizes every year. We've been doing this since 1991. So here in 2024, is that the year? This is the 34th time that we're doing the Ig Nobel Prizes. This is the time of year in the spring when we are selecting and getting in touch with the new winners. These are unusual prizes. These are for things that make people laugh and then think, and that's it for the criterion. Most other prizes of any kind seem to be about either the very best of something, like Olympic medals for the best athletic performance, or Academy Awards for the best movie, this or that. Or occasionally you run across some kind of prize for the very worst of things, the worst dressed list or things like that. With us, with the Ig Nobel Prizes, though, best and worst have nothing to do with it. They are irrelevant. Good and bad are irrelevant. Valuable or worthless, also irrelevant. It's just, have you done something that will make almost anybody, almost anywhere, immediately start laughing? And then it will creep into their head in a way that a week later, they still want to just think about that and tell their friends and argue about it. That's what this is about. Most of them have to do with science, but a lot of them don't. We often give out an Ig Nobel Peace Prize, fairly often an Ig Nobel Literature Prize. We've given prizes to very old people, to very, very young people, to dead people, and so on. Ask me some questions.
And to people who have had to fight the bureaucracy to prove they're not dead.
Yes.
It's my favorite one from your book, Ig Nobel Prizes 2. This is the second volume, Why Chickens Prefer Beautiful Humans, which is, a really intriguing title for a
Oh,
paper
thank you.
and a book. But yeah, it was the Night of the Living Dead, the poor man who had to prove that his greedy uncle had declared him dead. And he had spent a long time trying to prove that, in fact, he was alive. Not an easy
Yeah,
thing
and
to do.
he was and is not alone. This is the Ig Nobel Peace Prize, I think, and we gave that in, about 20 years ago. It's a man named Lal Behari who lives in India. What we learned from him is that in some parts of India then and still, if you own something of value that your relatives stand to inherit upon your death, and if you have relatives who are not very nice people, it's possible for them to go to a government office, pay a small bribe, and have you declared legally dead. If that happens, in effect, you are dead. You own nothing. You can't get a job. You can't even get arrested. that happened to this man, Lal Bahari, and his life in most ways ended at that point, even though he was still very much alive.
Mm.
And after a few years, he discovered he was not alone, that there were many thousands of other people that this happened to. That noise you're hearing is my dog, who also is very much alive. And he decided to start trying to do something about it. So he organized a lot of these living dead people. They formed the Association of Dead People and started to have public rallies outside the government offices of the officials who had done this kind of thing. Over many years, that started to have an effect. A few of them have been able to legally reclaim their lives. Most of them still not. They have also begun, well, now it's quite a while, they have been running legally dead people for political office. They've not yet succeeded in getting them elected, but apparently the vote totals keep rising slowly. So maybe over time there may be some of these living dead officials in government.
Mm. That would make people sit up and think for sure. Um, and that particular man, I think he even demanded that his wife was paid a widow's oh, what's it called? I can't remember. A widow
Yeah,
some
he was trying to do all things.
payment at
He at
least.
one point he was trying to get arrested for the publicity value, and
Yeah,
they refused to arrest him on the grounds that
because
he
he was
was
dead.
dead.
Yeah,
He would
extraordinary.
go up to government offices, say, "I'm not dead, I'm alive," and they would look at him, go look up the record, and say, "You're dead," and they would refuse to talk to him after that.
Oh, yeah, beyond belief.
Yeah.
Um, so he got a coveted prize.
Hmm.
And onto the science, some of the science winners. The one this year, I can't pronounce the person's surname. Jan Zalas.
Yeah. Jan Zelasowitz, he's a professor in England
Mhm.
of geology, and he won an Ig Nobel Prize because he wrote an essay that he published in a geology journal explaining why many scientists like to lick rocks.
Wow. And do they?
Yes, most of them are geologists. They study rocks.
And they
And the
taste
story
them.
of it is that, and it goes way back to the time a couple hundred years ago when they're just for the first time becoming people who were becoming professional scientists who studied rocks, who tried to make sense out of all the different kinds of rock there are around the world and what that tells us about the shape of the land and many other things. And at first, if you try to put yourself in their position, how do you make sense of this? How do you pick up two rocks? How do you tell the difference between them in any way that seems to have meaning for you and other people? And pretty quickly, one of the things that they started doing was discovering that the taste of different rocks varied. And also that as people began to have a complicated understanding of the different kinds of rocks that exist and their history, it turned out that when you pick up a rock, say you're out on a beautiful sunny day, you're out in the field, you find a rock that you don't recognize, you want to know what it is, you look at the surface. You want to see the patterns on the surface. That might tell you a lot. If it's a sunny day, that sometimes is not so easy, that the patterns are not so easy to see. But if it's a rainy day, the patterns are much, much more easy to see. So that immediately tells you a lot more about the rock. Well, what if you do if it's a sunny day and you don't have any water? Saliva is easily available to you, so you lick the rock. And this has become a very standard thing that most geologists learn pretty quickly. And so they're able to get a lot of information from this, and without even trying to develop a skill of telling by taste what different rocks are.
Mm. So clever. So very clever. And the chemistry that went into, because it says chemistry and geology winner, the
Yeah, we
it,
made this a prize jointly in two categories. We don't have the same categories necessarily every year. Remember, there are 10 prizes, but we pick the winners first, and then we try to figure out for each of them what category seems to explain this a little bit. And in this particular one, we thought geology, yeah, this is the study of rocks, but also there's a lot of chemistry involved in this. So we ended up doing this an award jointly in two categories, chemistry and geology.
And this practice is still current despite
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
Uh,
A
wow.
couple of weeks ago, I was doing a talk in Switzerland at a university there, and mentioned this prize. And a woman in the audience, very excited, raised her hand and started talking about how she is a geologist, a pretty young geologist, and how she was very proud to have acquired this skill. And there were about 700 people in the audience there, and most of them were not geologists, and they were they were laughing, but they were also clearly very excited that somebody in their midst was telling them that yes, this is not just a funny sounding thing. This is something that people actually do, and it's important to them.
It's wonderful. And you can imagine it easily years and years ago, before sophisticated equipment was available.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's nice to know that something so basic
There's a lot of
can
that.
still.
A lot of the, we should talk about specific prizes more so people have a better idea of this. With a lot of them, we've seen over the years that to the people who did them, these things are not especially funny or even funny at all. It's
Mm.
just what they do normally. And everybody's life is full of little things like that, that for you at some point was a great discovery. It improved, the way your day goes or the way you're able to do something more efficiently or more pleasantly or something, but you don't really tell anybody about it because it sounds like such a tiny thing. And also, if you do try to tell somebody about, say, the way you stir your coffee, it kind of sounds like you're crazy when you hear the words coming out of your mouth. And I'll give you an example of how this plays out with a lot of the Ig Nobel winners. Our general policy when we choose somebody to win an Ig Nobel Prize or we choose a team is to get in touch with them very quietly and offer them the Ig Nobel Prize. And if they want to say no, that's fine. That's the end of it, and we never tell anybody. Almost everybody we offer a prize to, though, says yes, so that's a nice thing. And quite a while ago, we offered a prize, which was accepted instantly by a team of scientists in Australia who had published a scientific study called An Analysis of the Forces Required to Drag Sheep Across Various Surfaces. An
Various
analysis, yeah, an analysis of the forces required to drag sheep across various surfaces. That phone call was the first moment any of those scientists realized that what they had done is funny. They live in a part of Australia where sheep are the big industry.
and they
And the
have to
sheep
drag them.
industry, a large chunk of the sheep industry had called in this bunch of scientists and asked them to look at everything we do in our industry and tell us two things. Tell us how can we make more money doing this? How can we be more efficient? And how can we cut down on the number of injuries to the sheep and to the people who are handling the sheep? A lot of it is shearing the wool off them using big electrical cutters, which are very dangerous to the sheep and to the people. So that's what these scientists did. And they did the report. One of the things they discovered, and at several public events with some of them, I've heard them describe this to the public, usually with, sorry to say it, well, no, I'm not, with a sheepish look on their faces, is that one of the most basic things they discovered was that it's easier to drag a sheep downhill.
Okay, I mean that makes
And
a lot of sense.
it
Gravity
makes a
on your
lot of
side.
sense, but that's not what was happening. What had happened in a lot of these places, as the industry grew, the centers where people would bring their sheep to be sheared would also grow, and so they would add a new building with ramps between the buildings as things grew, and some of the ramps were used to lead the sheep from one building up to a higher level in another. So they were having to drag the sheep every day, hundreds or thousands of sheep uphill, and none of them had ever stopped to realize it. until these scientists came along and said, do you realize you're dragging these sheep uphill? It'll be more efficient if you drag them downhill.
Well, thank goodness for that paper. I don't know how long they carried on doing that for.
And they may still be doing it elsewhere.
Oh heavens, I hope not. I hope not. For the sheep's sake, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Um, so you said the prizes started in 1993,
1991.
1991.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and what came first, the prizes or the magazine? Uh, the annals
It's
of
an intricate
improbable
story.
research.
In 1990, I became the editor of a science magazine, which happened because I got curious about whether some of the stuff that I'd been writing and giving to friends might be publishable. So I sent some stuff off to a science magazine and got a phone call a few weeks later from a man who said, "Hi, I'm the publisher of the journal. Got your articles. Would you be the editor of the magazine?" So suddenly I was the editor of a science magazine. This was on top of what I was normally doing for work. And suddenly I was meeting people all over the place who had done things that were very unusual, and so unusual that they were funny and strange and thought-provoking. And I kept thinking that most of these people are going to go their whole life and then they will die at some point. And after that, nobody will know what they did. Nobody will know about these fantastic things. Somebody should do something about that. And realize, well, we can do something small. So we started this ceremony in 1991. And the first year, I had met a lot of famous scientists too. And so I invited some of them to come to this ceremony. I got offered a place to have it at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And a lot of people wanted to be helpful. And so that first year, we put a little notice out on the internet, which was tiny then, saying that the first annual Ig Nobel Prize ceremony will happen at MIT on such and such a date. It'll be free this year, but you need a ticket. And to get a ticket, you have to come to a particular office at MIT on Tuesday afternoon at noon and get a ticket. And the tickets all disappeared almost instantly. So we had the ceremony, we picked some winners, they came to the ceremony. More people came than would fit in the building. People were practically trying to climb up the outside of the building to get in.
Nice.
We had reporters coming from around the world, and it got a lot of really nice attention in the press around the world. And because all that stuff happened the first year, involving an awful lot of good luck, we were able to do it the next year on a bigger scale. And that simply has continued ever since.
Mhm.
And then that magazine ran into some problems with the publisher. And after about 4 years, it was becoming really impossible for me to run the thing. They just were providing no resources whatsoever. So I asked everybody involved, do you want to just come and we'll start a brand new magazine, which we did. And that was the Annals, and is the Annals of Improbable Research, which we started in, I guess, 1995 or 4, somewhere around there.
Mhm. Wow. What a lovely story. And it's nice actually that it just simply comes out of you wanting to give the people who've done so much work that recognition.
Some of them, it wasn't work they'd done, it's just something happened to them and,
Fine.
and didn't kill them. And it's a story that, is thought-provoking in some way, and
Mm,
first of all, funny. And the essence of all this stuff, really, it took me a long time to realize, is that these are things that are simply surprising. They're just outside almost anybody's experience. They're so far outside almost anyone's experience that your first reaction to it doesn't involve conscious thought. It's just you start laughing, and then
exactly.
you start to wonder about it. So that's the essence of this thing.
Exactly. So you said on top of what you were the when you started doing that, the magazine that failed, you
The
you took
magazine was
that
made
on
to fail by its
made to
publishers.
fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. The magazine that is no more. You said you took that on top of what you were already doing for work.
Right.
What
Yeah.
which was that science related?
Sort of. It was computer stuff. In college, I had majored in a field called applied mathematics. Nobody really knows what that is, but as far as I was concerned, it was a license to dabble in everything, which I tried to do. And that's really what I was doing as a kid, and that's what I'm doing now. And then I went off and I was doing all kinds of computer stuff, including for about 4 or 5 years working for what was sometimes called the first artificial intelligence company. Nobody ever knew what that phrase meant, artificial intelligence, but this company was doing things that were really pretty wonderful. It was making the first machine that would take a printed book or printed anything and scan it and read it out loud for blind people. So it's a reading machine for blind people, and a whole bunch of machines that were variations on that. So I did that for a few years. And then I went off and started my own software company that was doing very different stuff, essentially gathering stories from people in many different professions and walks of life about experiences that they had gone through that they really screwed up in, but that taught them a lesson. And so I was simulating what it's like to be in these professions at the moment when everything's going wrong and you have to make a decision where there is no good decision, but there are a lot of bad decisions that you ought to try to understand and anticipate.
Like a
So that's what I was doing at the
moral
time I sent this
quandary.
stuff off to be published.
That was a
Pardon?
moral quandary type thing, when
Moral a little bit, but practical stuff about
okay.
many different things, and many different professions have that. And you only hear about these things if you talk to somebody who's been working at a particular kind of job for a long time, 10 or 20 years, and they're the kind of person who everybody who works with them realizes they're much better at doing this somehow than
Mm.
anybody else. And a lot of them tend to be women, especially in fields like banking, and not to be celebrated very much. They tend not to rise all that high because they're very good at stuff. And in the case of women, because they're women. But they have really good stories. They're the ones who are able to survive a long time and to develop a kind of deep, good judgment about things that's difficult to put into words.
Is it like scenario planning, or is it different from?
Planning is maybe not the best way to describe it. It's things that are, if you work at this kind of job long enough, this is going to happen to you.
Mhm. Right.
And when it does, you're going to feel like you got whacked in the head.
Have you got
But
any
if you,
examples?
yeah, I'll give you a very simple example from the world of banking, which is, not in general a very colorful world. The entry level jobs there in most parts of the world are you work in the branch of a bank and people come in, at least until recently, with a check that they want to get cashed. And the question for you is, do I cash the check? Do I give them actual money or do I refuse to do that? When you're pretty new, it's very hard to refuse if you have some doubts about this. And that's where a lot of fraud enters the picture. And it takes people a long time, if ever, to develop the savvy about judging what's a real risk of being, having fraud pulled on you and what's not.
Mhm.
And often that just comes down to, if you're not sure, go and ask your boss. But of course, nobody ever feels comfortable doing that.
No.
And that kind of situation comes up all the time. Almost everybody in that kind of job has been burned. The institutions have been burned. And the people who get good at it are the ones who end up over the long term running those bank branches if the bank knows what it's doing. And
Mm.
historically, that's been women, not men, which is very interesting to me.
Mm. The intuition.
You call it intuition, but a lot of it is just learning to recognize things that happen so that when it starts to happen, you'll realize that right away rather than realizing it too late when there's nothing to do about it.
Mm.
Another kind of, we're getting very sidetracked here, but another kind of situation and keep in mind, this was 35 years ago or so when I was doing this stuff, but that would come up in almost every profession, but that everybody thought was really rare, is you come into work one morning and people come up to you and say, so and so who works with us is threatening to kill another person who works with us. That's not as unusual as everybody thinks it is. It never has been. But everybody who has to deal with that feels really shaky for the rest of their lives afterwards, and they don't want to talk about it.
Oh, how
Well,
interesting.
but if you try to work through it and get a little experience, you pretty quickly learn from the people who've been through that there's no good way to deal with that situation, but there are a lot of really bad ways. And some of those can end up in really horrible situations. So if you've kind of thought and even a little bit lived through even a bad simulation of that, you might handle it better when you find yourself in that situation.
Lab Matters is brought to you by the award-winning temperature control equipment from Polyscience, available worldwide. Polyscience, changing the world of temperature control forever. Wow, fingers.
That's what I was doing before I was doing this stuff.
God, what a change, I suppose. What I mean,
Well, it was, but I also found that if you as really simple stories, that's where the computer came in, really simple. And they were really simple simulations of really nasty, commonplace situations. If you present them in a way that's a little bit funny, that helps people both relax and get into trouble more quickly, and also relax and then discuss it afterward. And that's what really these computer simulations I was doing were trying to do. They weren't trying to have the computer teach anything to the person. They were used by a room full of people, and it was really just the computer was in a really kind of dumb, simple way, making it easy for these people to start asking each other questions and turn to the one person in the room who has the most experience and say, how did you deal with this? So that's what I was trying to
it
do.
is. So you went from,
And that's what I'm still trying to do in a
yeah,
kind of deep way too.
yeah. It's like it's a delightful contrast, these incredibly frequent scenarios and now these entirely improbable scenarios. Um, but then before that, I mean, not before
Yeah.
that, alongside all of that, you're an author as well. You've written a number of books. I've got one here, like I said, but
Uh-huh.
that's even the second volume of that series. But that you've written tons of books from what I could make out.
Yeah, a bunch of books on various things that have been that I first wrote for the magazines, or several books about the Ig Nobel Prize winners, about the things they've done, and some of the histories of the people. All of these are really stories about people when you come down to it. Even something that appears on the surface to be a story about rocks and licking rocks. It's really about, why do people do this? And wow, that might make more sense than is obvious to somebody outside. And I've also, even when I was a little kid, I liked writing stuff, and I liked science, and I liked stuff that was funny. So I've found ways to combine all this stuff. And I've also been able to be a columnist in a bunch of different magazines and newspapers, which has been really fun for me to do. I was writing that column in The Guardian every week for about 13 years, for a bunch of different magazines over the years in various fields. And the last couple of years, I've been writing a column every week in New Scientist magazine on the back page, which is also, for me at least, and I hope for the readers, a lot of fun. It's little bits and pieces of all kinds of things that I hope are very surprising and funny.
Absolutely. And I haven't mentioned it. It might be clear to some people that you're in Cambridge in Massachusetts.
That's right.
Did you grow up there? What?
I grew up in Massachusetts, not far from here, and started coming into Cambridge, which is a small city right next to the not much larger city called Boston. And I started coming in when I was about 12 or 13 years. I figured out how to get into the big city because there were movie theaters that showed old movies, and some of my teachers and other people had always been saying things to me like, "Oh, you're a young Woody Allen," or "You're a young Groucho Marx," and and I'd never seen a Marx Brothers movie. So I very bravely figured out how to get into the city, take a bus into a subway, and go to one of these movie theaters and see my first Marx Brothers movie. And that really changed the world for me.
Which one was it?
It was two of them, really, a double header, Night at the Opera and Day at the Races.
Classics. Um, that changed things for you. Okay. So was there anything
Or accelerated things, maybe that's,
fine? Okay.
yeah.
You were open to being inspired.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Um, and then what was there anything in your childhood or teenage years that indicated that when you look back now that you might end up orbiting scientific people, the science arena?
Yeah, probably a bunch of things. But one of them was one teacher I had for 3 years teaching math, Mrs. Bondalevich, who was a really good teacher. And she used to play records that were songs written and sung by a guy named Tom Lehrer. Lehrer. Tom was a mathematician at Harvard. And in the 1950s and 60s, he wrote a bunch of songs that are still really funny and really beautifully written in the sense of built beautifully. I mean, he absolute master at words and thoughts and being funny and sharp. So, when I was, 9, 10, 11 years old, my teacher was playing these records in class all the time. And that, I'm pretty sure, had a big effect. And years later, I got to meet Tom when I was much older, and even got some help from him on some of the Ig Nobel ceremonies after we started doing that. Because I called him up and invited him to the very first Ig Nobel ceremony. He came to that. And then a few years later, started jamming into the ceremony, all kinds of other stuff in between the 10 announcements of the prizes. And every year started to write a little opera about something in science, performed by opera singers and by some of the famous scientists. And Tom was very good for a few years about letting me come over and show him the stuff I'd written, and he would rip it to pieces. And that's how I learned to be a little better about writing words for singers.
How brilliant. I'd love to hear some of those operas. Where can we hear them?
Most of them are in the videos of the Ig Nobel Prize ceremonies, which are up on our website, improbable.com. One of the most popular songs from that, and when I say write the songs, I don't write the music. I don't know enough about music to do that. So I steal the music from dead composers, usually music that's in people's heads from old movies and cartoons and stuff, and then write a little plot and the words. One of them that we did a number of years ago seems to have taken off on quite a life. It's a song about something that won an Ig Nobel Prize. It was a psychology paper written by two people, two psychologists named Dunning and Kruger. And the thing they described in their
Kruger effect.
paper is now called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Almost every psychologist in the world knows it, and it also appears every few
Social
years
scientist.
out in the news because it seems to describe something that everybody's familiar with. And what it describes is what happens often with people who are incompetent at some particular skill compared with people who are demonstrably competent at that skill, whatever it is. And the Dunning-Kruger effect, the part of it that people like to talk about is that an awful lot of people who are not good at something don't realize that they're not good at it. They think they're just as good or better than the people who really are good.
Yeah, my worst
And that's
fear.
what the song is about. Yeah.
Um, I'm sure I'll be proven to be a purveyor of the Dunning-Kruger effect in
Well,
many areas. I
that's,
can't bear it.
I think I think maybe that's something that's true of all of us. You know,
Mm,
everybody is good at some things, and then there's everything else. And it's maybe hard for all of us to fully realize some of that other stuff, that we're not as good at it as we are tempted to think we are.
mm. Yeah, that's the key. So we'll move on from that and try, and hopefully we're not quite as bad as we might be as well. And
Well, for the amusement of other people, maybe it's good if we are.
well, yeah, good point. As long as they're laughing. Um, so now these your awards are now at Harvard, is that right?
Yeah, the first 4 years we had them at MIT, and then we moved them down the street to Harvard, which is just 2 miles down the road, also in Cambridge.
Hmm.
And this year we're moving them back to MIT.
Why is that?
Um, it Well, during the past 4 pandemic years, we weren't able to do them in a big theater with
Mm,
an audience and all the winners and everybody else together because of the pandemic. So we did them as purely online events, where we would secretly record all the prize presentations and acceptances and the opera and everything else, and then stitch that together and then webcast it on Ig Nobel Day in September. And during those 4 years, unfortunately, at Harvard, it was made bureaucratically much more difficult for us to do events. So we got invited to move it back to MIT, and I'm happy to say we're bringing it back to its original home.
your birth home, marvelous.
Yeah.
Um, and you'll still have the Nobel laureates present the prizes, and
Oh
all
yeah.
will remain the same.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Well, every year we try to make it a little different, and where we're moving from a very big theater to a very different space at MIT. MIT has one old lecture hall in particular that to me has always been the absolute best example of what everybody's idea of a scientific lecture hall is, and that's where we're having it.
Fabulous.
But because it's a lecture hall and not a theater, the technically it's a very different space. So we're having to figure out all kinds of stuff about how do we fit all these people in the room. Technically, well, how do we deal with the cameras and the lighting and all the other stuff that's going to happen? How do we fit the opera singers in the room? How do we make all this stuff happen efficiently? So there's a lot of engineering we're having to do. But that's kind of fun. When you do something for many years, you after a number of years you start to wonder about, gee, if we were able to start over again with all the stuff we've learned, all the little stuff, how would we do it in a different way? Well,
Mm,
that's what we're getting to do.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so now I've got a couple more questions to ask before we run out of time.
Mhm.
Um, the first one, it's almost too obvious for words. Have you got a personal favorite prize that you've awarded?
I have many. When I get asked that question on different days, it's a different answer. But one of them
Okay.
that always is near the top of that list was the Ig Nobel Biology Prize we gave in the year 2003. We gave it to a Dutch scientist, an ornithologist. He studies birds, for something he noticed. He noticed something really unusual about birds. And after a lot of prodding from his scientist friends, he finally wrote a scientific paper about it. And somebody sent us a copy of that paper because it was published in a very small science journal that not a lot of people see, but happily somebody sent it to us. And that paper is the first scientific documentation of the existence of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard duck.
And a more detailed analysis can be
Mhm.
found in this book as well.
Yes, and
But
also
that, I
in the
mean, it's a
paper, and
very
yeah, the one thing I
challenging.
want to say about the paper that I hope everybody would come to realize is whatever you might expect, just hearing the title of that, that's not what it is. It's so much more and so much better and so much more delightful than you could
Mm.
almost possibly imagine.
I could say read the book, but I feel like I got the last copy when I ordered this off Amazon. It's not a new book. Just give us a tiny bit of info on that one.
Yeah, let me give it in a unusual way that four words for you and anybody else to write down. And then Google these four words. Go and search for these four words on the internet.
Okay,
You know what a TED Talk is?
I do.
Those lectures. So the four words are TED
Hmm.
Talk,
Hmm.
Dead Duck. That will bring you to a short talk by the scientist who won the prize, and that will open new worlds to you.
Noted. Well, I will look forward to doing that. And the other question that I've taken to asking people
Mhm.
before we finish is what are your hopes for the future of science? If you could change one thing about anything to do with it, what would it be?
That more scientists in more places from the beginning of their careers get into the habit of talking to non-scientists about what they're doing, of
Mm.
trying to not figure out, just trying to get everyday experience at talking with other people about what they're doing in a way that other people will understand. And I
Mhm.
think it's one of those things that is much simpler than people expect. That if you're just trying to talk with somebody rather than at them, have a conversation, no matter who you are, you will find yourself getting better and better and better at describing things in simpler and simpler and clearer words.
Mhm.
And then seeing how excited people get when they actually want to know more, and they'll start telling you stuff about themselves. But traditionally, especially in the last century, a lot of the way science has been set up in institutions has worked very hard to keep that from happening. One of the best things that's been changing over the last 20 years especially is that in many parts of the world it's now becoming not only acceptable but almost demanded, at least sometimes, that young scientists start to talk to people about it. They used to be prohibited in many places, which was crazy.
Mm. That is.
And the Ig Nobel Prizes, I'm really happy to say, are playing a real role in making it easy for people to do that. We have a lot of public events where that's essentially what's going on. You get a scientist who's done something that's so surprising that it makes people laugh
Mhm.
and then think. And they're doing a short talk for an audience and then taking questions. And the scientist and the audience asking each other questions and answering is always the best part of it.
Mm. Um, exactly. And the I feel like this everything that you do does play a large part in it, as you said. And I forgot to say that you've got a road show you've just finished.
Yeah.
You take the prizes on the road every year.
Yeah, I've been doing that for a long time.
Mm.
And in particular, every spring, at least until the pandemic, it stopped for 4 years, and then we've just brought it back to life in the last month. Every spring, I travel to Europe. Again, I live in North America, so I travel to Europe and then meet up with a variety of people who've won Ig Nobel Prizes in a lot of different places in a lot of different countries. And we have these events where the Ig Nobel winners are doing short talks, and I do a short talk, and the audience asks questions. And
Mm.
it's really, uh, to me, some of the best days in existence.
I can imagine. I really can. Well, look, Mark, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Intriguing, amusing, and now we've all got some homework to do as well.
Yeah,
Dead talk, dead
let me
duck.
give one more piece of homework
Yep, go
now that you
ahead.
bring it up, which is for you and anybody who's listening to this. If you run across somebody who's done something that makes you laugh and then think, and you're pretty sure it would have that effect on anybody, anywhere in the world, no matter who they are, do what you usually do. Tell your two or three best friends, and then send us an email. Tell us. That's how we learn about almost all of the people who win Ig Nobel Prizes. Is somebody somewhere notices it and they tell us.
Hmm. Noted. That's it. So we get in touch with
Thanks.
you. We'll let you know when we come across anything noteworthy that's made us
Thank you.
laugh.
And think.
Fabulous. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Thanks, Harriet.